This is the story of Porsche Streeter, a 30-year-old mother of three whose life ended in violence on January 13, 2024. What began as a reported home invasion in an Orlando apartment quickly unraveled into something far more calculated and heartbreaking. As we watch police take Son Range Jr. into custody, it's hard to imagine this man once shared a decade-long relationship and 3 children with Porsche. Behind his claims of being a victim himself lay a disturbing truth that investigators would methodically expose. The evidence told a different story than the one Range presented to police, a story of jealousy, control, and ultimately, a murder conspiracy involving his own cousin. What drives a man to orchestrate the killing of his children's mother while they sleep beside her? Today, we'll walk through the investigation that exposed this elaborate deception, reveal the crucial testimony that broke the case open, and examine the warning signs that preceded this tragedy. This is more than just a murder case. It's a stark reminder of how dangerous domestic violence can become when a victim tries to break free.
911, what's your emergency? Someone broke into our apartment. They shot my girlfriend. Please hurry. Sir, is the shooter still there? No, he ran away. I tried to chase him. I got shot too. Please, she's bleeding bad.
The desperate voice you just heard belongs to Son Range Jr., calling 911 on January 13, 2024, from an Orlando apartment. Inside that apartment, a young mother of 3 named Porsche Streeter lay motionless in her bed, struck by multiple gunshots while her children were beside her. Emergency services rushed to the scene as Range described what appeared to be a home invasion gone tragically wrong. Orlando, Florida, may be known worldwide for its theme parks and family-friendly attractions, but the city has another side tourists rarely see. Behind the vacation destinations lies a community that struggles with some of Florida's highest rates of domestic violence, where intimate partner homicides occur with alarming frequency. It was in this complex city that 30-year-old Porsche built her life, raising 3 children while running a small hairdressing business from her apartment. When police arrived that night, the scene initially matched Range's frantic account. They found signs of struggle, missing valuables, and Range himself with a gunshot wound to his arm. He told officers an armed intruder had followed him into the apartment, demanded money and jewelry, then opened fire. According to his statement, he had chased the attacker and recovered stolen phones before returning to find Porsche critically wounded. I was telling her to keep fighting, Range told detectives, tears streaming down his face. I tried everything to save her. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic but straightforward case, a random home invasion in a city where such crimes occasionally happen. But as investigators examined the scene more carefully, they noticed troubling details. The blood around Porsche's wounds wasn't fresh. The timeline Range described didn't match the evidence. And most concerning of all, the medical examiner found signs that Porsche had been dead for hours before anyone called 911. What really happened to this devoted mother of 3? Why would someone want her dead? And how did detectives transform an apparent random act of violence into a case that would expose a conspiracy between the man who claimed to love her and his own family member? Here at Crime Scene Exposed, we dive deep into the most infamous crimes, baffling disappearances, disturbing confessions, and twisted criminal minds from around the world. If you're fascinated by how investigators uncover the truth behind shocking crimes like this one, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more detailed investigations and gripping storytelling. Now let's uncover how this seemingly perfect family man became the architect of a murder that shocked Orlando. As Porsche's children were taken into protective custody that night, they carried a secret that would eventually help break the case wide open. The oldest child, just 10 years old, had seen something that contradicted everything Range had told police. And what this child revealed would transform a supposed random attack into one of the most heartless betrayals imaginable. Porsche Nikita Shaney Streeter was a woman defined by her resilience. At 30 years old, she had built a life centered around her 3 children, ages 10, 2, and 1, who meant everything to her. Those who knew Porsche described her as a devoted mother who would do anything for her kids, often working long hours to ensure they had everything they needed. She was always with those babies, one neighbor would later tell investigators. You'd see her taking them to the park, helping with homework, just being there for them. Those children were her world. Despite the challenges of raising 3 young children, Porsche had entrepreneurial ambitions. She ran a small but growing hairdressing business from her Orlando apartment, transforming a spare room into a makeshift salon where she styled hair for a loyal clientele. Her Facebook page showcased not only her love for her children, but also her pride in her work, photos of completed styles, grateful client testimonials, and announcements about appointment availability. Friends noted that Porsche dreamed of one day opening her own salon. She was saving money, building her skills, and expanding her client base, all while juggling the demands of motherhood. Her determination was evident in how she structured her business hours around her children's schedules, often working late into the evening after they were asleep. But behind Porsche's aspirations and maternal devotion lay a complicated relationship that had dominated more than a decade of her life. She and Son Range Jr. had met in high school, beginning a romance that would evolve into a long-term relationship marked by instability and conflict. Their history together followed a predictable pattern. Periods of apparent happiness interrupted by explosive arguments, accusations of infidelity, and breakups that never seemed to last. Friends would later tell police that Porsche had tried to end the relationship multiple times over the years, but various factors, including financial dependence and concern for their children, kept pulling her back. They were always on again, off again, one friend explained. She'd leave him, then he'd convince her to try again for the kids' sake. What many didn't see was the darker side of their relationship. Behind closed doors, Range's behavior had escalated from verbal arguments to physical violence. According to family members, he had beaten Porsche in front of their children on multiple occasions. These incidents were rarely reported to authorities, as Porsche felt trapped in a difficult situation. Range paid the rent and helped with childcare, making it nearly impossible for her to leave permanently. Despite these challenges, Porsche maintained small acts of independence. She kept her name as the only one on the apartment lease. She built her business to create financial autonomy, and she continued to dream of a better future for herself and her children. In the months before her death, the relationship had grown increasingly tense. Porsche had discovered Range was seeing other women. Meanwhile, Range had grown resentful of what he perceived as Porsche's attempts to control him. Text messages recovered from their phones revealed arguments about money, child care responsibilities, and accusations of disrespect. One message in particular, where Porsche had called Range a sissy after an argument, seemed to have wounded his pride deeply. Friends noted that after this exchange, his attitude toward her changed noticeably. The cycle of reconciliation and conflict that had defined their relationship for years was reaching a breaking point. Porsche was beginning to hide money from Range, saving for a potential fresh start. She confided in close friends that she was considering a more permanent separation and was exploring her options for full custody of their children. What Porsche couldn't have known was how dangerous this moment truly was. Research consistently shows that the period when a woman attempts to leave an abusive relationship is often the most lethal. For Porsche, her growing independence and the custody dispute that loomed on the horizon would prove to be catalysts for tragedy. By early 2024, the relationship between Porsche and Range had deteriorated significantly. What had once been a high school romance had transformed into a power struggle with their 3 children caught in the middle. The couple's arguments had become more frequent and intense, often revolving around money, parenting decisions, and allegations of infidelity. Text messages recovered from their phones painted a picture of growing hostility. Range accused Porsche of disrespecting him in front of friends and family. Porsche complained about his inconsistent financial support and questioned his commitment as a father. Their exchanges were filled with recriminations and threats, particularly regarding custody of their children. The custody issue had become a flashpoint. Porsche had begun consulting with friends about her legal options for obtaining full custody, a move that Range discovered through their mutual acquaintances. When confronted, Porsche didn't deny her intentions, telling him that she wanted more stability for their children. This revelation infuriated Range, who saw the children as leverage in their relationship. "If you try to take my kids, you'll regret it," he texted her in December 2023, just weeks before her death. Financial tensions added another layer of conflict. Range had recently discovered that Porsche was hiding money from him, savings she was accumulating from her hairdressing business that she kept in a separate account he couldn't access. When he demanded to know why she was holding out on him, she deflected, claiming the money was for their children's future. In reality, as Porsche confided to a close friend, she was building an escape fund. She needed enough money to secure a new apartment, pay for childcare, and support herself and her children during what she anticipated would be a messy separation. Her business was growing, but not quickly enough to provide the financial independence she needed. Despite these tensions, Porsche maintained small acts of autonomy. She refused to add Range's name to her apartment lease, despite his pressure to do so. She changed the passwords on her social media accounts and began password protecting her phone, actions that Range interpreted as evidence of her infidelity, but were actually attempts to create boundaries. On January 12, 2024, the day before her murder, Porsche and Range had a heated argument that neighbors overheard. The dispute centered on Range taking her phone charger and apartment key without permission. For Porsche, these items represented her independence. The charger kept her connected to clients and friends, while the key symbolized her control over her own space. "You can't just take my stuff whenever you want," she told him, according to a neighbor who overheard the argument. "This is my apartment. My name is on the lease." Range reportedly responded by reminding her who paid the rent, despite her name being the only one on the paperwork. The argument escalated until Porsche threatened to call the police if he didn't return her key. Eventually, Range left the apartment, slamming the door behind him. What Porsche didn't know was that this argument had pushed Range to a breaking point. Phone records would later show that immediately after leaving her apartment, he called his cousin, Benjamin Garman. The two spoke for nearly 30 minutes, a conversation that investigators would later determine was the beginning of their murder plot. That night, Porsche put her children to bed as usual, unaware that the man she had argued with hours earlier was now planning to end her life. She posted on social media about new hair appointments for the coming week and messaged a friend about possibly looking at apartments in a different neighborhood. These would be the last normal activities of her life. On the night of January 13, 2024, the quiet of Porsche's Orlando apartment complex was shattered by gunfire. According to the timeline later established by investigators, Porsche had gone to bed early that evening, her 3 children nestled beside her in the family bed, a habit she had developed to make them feel secure. What happened next would be pieced together through forensic evidence, witness statements, and the eventual testimony of Porsche's oldest child. Sometime after midnight, while Porsche and her children slept, someone entered the apartment. The intruder moved through the darkened rooms until reaching the bedroom where the family lay sleeping. Without warning, the attacker opened fire. 10 shots were fired at close range, all striking Porsche as she lay in bed. Remarkably and thankfully, none of the children were physically harmed in the attack, though they would bear the psychological scars of witnessing their mother's murder. The first 911 call about the incident didn't come until hours later. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Son Range Jr. called emergency services, his voice frantic as he reported a home invasion. "Someone broke in and shot my girlfriend," he told the dispatcher. "I've been shot too. Please hurry." When police and paramedics arrived at the apartment, they found a chaotic scene. Range was pacing in the living room, clutching his arm where a bullet had apparently grazed him. He directed first responders to the bedroom, where they found Porsche's body. The 3 children had been moved to another room, away from their mother. Paramedics immediately assessed Porsche, but quickly determined she was beyond help. The medical team noted something unusual. The blood around her wounds was already dry, suggesting she had been dead for some time before emergency services were called. As crime scene technicians began processing the apartment, detectives took Range's initial statement. He painted a detailed picture of what he claimed had happened. According to Range, he had come to the apartment late that night to check on Porsche and the children after she hadn't responded to his texts. As he entered the apartment, he said an armed man had followed him inside, holding him at gunpoint. The intruder demanded money and jewelry, then forced Range to lead him to the bedroom where Porsche was sleeping. When she reached for her phone to call for help, he just started shooting. Range told detectives, his voice breaking. "I tried to stop him, but he shot me too." Range claimed the attacker then grabbed cash and their cell phones before fleeing. In his version of events, he had chased the man down the street, managing to recover the phones before returning to the apartment to find Porsche gravely injured. He described attempting to help her, telling her to keep fighting as he tried to stop the bleeding. "I was in shock," he explained when asked about the delay in calling 911. "I tried to get help from neighbors first, but no one answered their doors." At first glance, the scene appeared to support parts of his story. The apartment showed signs of disturbance, drawers pulled open, items scattered on the floor, and a broken window that could have been an entry point. Range's arm injury, while not severe, was consistent with a gunshot graze. However, as detectives continued their initial assessment, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. The medical examiner who arrived to examine Porsche's body noted mild decomposition, indicating she had been dead for significantly longer than Range's timeline suggested, possibly as much as 2 hours before the 911 call. Additionally, officers canvassing the neighborhood could find no witnesses who had heard gunshots at the time Range claimed the attack occurred. Several residents reported hearing what might have been gunfire much earlier in the night, around midnight. Perhaps most concerning was the behavior of Porsche's oldest child. When gently questioned by a victim advocate, the 10-year-old appeared confused by Range's version of events. Though traumatized and reluctant to speak, the child's hesitation raised red flags for investigators. As the sun rose on January 14th, detectives were already harboring serious doubts about the home invasion narrative. They ordered a more thorough processing of the crime scene, requested security footage from neighboring buildings, and arranged for formal interviews with Range and the children once they had been medically cleared. What had initially appeared to be a tragic home invasion was beginning to look like something far more complex and potentially more calculated. What do you think happened? Was this really a home invasion gone wrong, or something more complicated? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you're finding this case as compelling as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to Crime Scene Exposed for more in-depth investigations into cases just like this one. As investigators dug deeper into the case, Range's carefully constructed narrative began to collapse under the weight of forensic evidence, witness statements, and technological data. The Orlando Police Department assigned their most experienced homicide detectives to the case, recognizing that the initial story of a home invasion didn't align with the evidence at the scene. The medical examiner's report delivered the first major blow to Range's account. Dr. Maria Sanchez, the forensic pathologist who performed Porsche's autopsy, determined that she had died between 12:15 a.m. and 12:45 a.m., approximately 2 hours before Range placed his 911 call at 2:30 a.m. This finding directly contradicted his claim that he had called for help immediately after the shooting. The victim exhibited clear signs of early decomposition, Dr. Sanchez noted in her report. Blood pooling patterns and body temperature indicate she had been deceased for a significant period before emergency services were contacted. The autopsy revealed another critical detail. Porsche had been shot 10 times at close range while lying in bed. The trajectory of the bullets suggested she was likely asleep or at least lying down when attacked, contradicting Range's claim that she had been reaching for her phone when the intruder opened fire. Detectives then turned their attention to the neighborhood's security infrastructure. While Porsche's apartment building lacked cameras, a convenience store across the street had surveillance equipment that captured the parking lot and street. This footage proved invaluable. The security video showed Range's car arriving at the apartment complex at 11:45 p.m., not after midnight, as he had claimed. More damning was the footage showing another vehicle, later identified as belonging to Benjamin Garman, Range's cousin, arriving 5 minutes later and parking in a secluded corner of the lot. At 12:10 a.m., the cameras captured a figure matching Garman's description entering the building. At 12:40 a.m., around the time the medical examiner estimated Porsche died, the same figure was seen leaving the building and driving away. Range's vehicle remained in the parking lot until 2:25 a.m., just minutes before he called 911. This timeline makes it impossible for the events to have occurred as Mr. Range described, Detective James Wilson explained in his case notes. The suspect's vehicle was already gone when he claims the home invasion took place. Witness statements further undermined Range's story. 3 neighbors reported hearing what sounded like gunshots around midnight, not at the 2 a.m. timeframe Range had provided. One neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, told police she had seen Range pacing outside the apartment building around 1:30 a.m., appearing agitated but uninjured. He was walking back and forth talking on his phone, Mrs. Jenkins stated. I noticed because it was cold that night, and he was just in a t-shirt. He didn't look hurt at all. Phone records revealed more inconsistencies. Range claimed the intruder had stolen their phones, which he then recovered during a chase. However, data showed that Porsche's phone had connected to the apartment's Wi-Fi continuously until 2:15 a.m., long after she had died, and just before Range called 911. This suggested he had been in possession of her phone the entire time. Text messages recovered from Range's phone showed a series of exchanges with his cousin Benjamin in the days leading up to the murder. While the messages were vague, they contained references to handling that situation and making sure it's done right. The final message, sent just hours before the murder, simply read, "Tonight." Perhaps the most heartbreaking breakthrough came from Porsche's oldest child. Initially too traumatized to speak about what happened, the 10-year-old eventually opened up to a specialized child forensic interviewer. What the child revealed changed the entire direction of the investigation. "The bad man came in while we were sleeping," the child told the interviewer. "Mommy didn't wake up. He shot her lots of times." When shown a photo lineup, the child identified Benjamin Garman, not an unknown intruder, as the shooter. Even more shocking, the child revealed that Daddy wasn't there when the bad man came, directly contradicting Range's claim that he and Porsche were attacked simultaneously. The child also described being moved to another room after the shooting and being told by Range, who arrived later, "Don't tell anyone what you saw. Say it was a stranger who hurt Mommy." This testimony, combined with the physical evidence, painted a very different picture of the night's events. Garman had entered the apartment around midnight and shot Porsche while she slept. Range was not present during the actual murder, but arrived afterward. The two men had staged the scene to look like a home invasion, with Range even inflicting a minor gunshot wound on himself to support his story. Detectives also discovered that Range had tampered with evidence. The apartment building did have a security camera at its entrance, but the footage from January 13th had been deleted. Digital forensics experts were able to recover fragments of the deleted video, which showed Garman entering the building at the time witnesses reported hearing gunshots. As investigators assembled these pieces, the picture became clear. This was not a random act of violence, but a calculated murder plot between Range and his cousin, a conspiracy motivated by Range's desire to eliminate Porsche rather than lose control over her and their children. By February 2024, detectives had gathered enough evidence to present their case to the district attorney. The home invasion story that had initially seemed plausible had been methodically dismantled, revealing a far more disturbing truth. As investigators pieced together the evidence, a disturbing picture emerged of how Son Range Jr. and his cousin Benjamin Garman had plotted Porsche Streeter's murder. Their relationship went beyond typical family ties. Phone records revealed they had spoken almost daily in the weeks leading up to the killing, with calls increasing in frequency and duration as January 13th approached. Benjamin Garman, 32, had a history of minor criminal offenses but had never been involved in violent crime. Detectives discovered that Range had recently helped Garman financially, paying off several $1,000s of debt. This financial assistance, investigators believed, created an obligation that Range later exploited. "We think Range essentially bought his cousin's cooperation," explained Detective Wilson. "He solved Garman's money problems, then called in the favor in the worst possible way." Text messages recovered from both men's phones, though carefully worded, revealed the evolution of their plan. On January 7th, Range texted Garman, "Need to talk about that thing we discussed. It needs to happen soon." Garman replied, "You sure about this? No going back." Range's response was chilling in its simplicity, "I'm sure. She's leaving me no choice." The investigation revealed that Range had provided Garman with detailed information about the apartment layout and Porsche's sleeping habits. He knew she typically went to bed around 10:30 p.m. with the children beside her. He also gave Garman a key to the apartment, the same key he had taken from Porsche during their argument the day before the murder. On the night of January 13th, according to the timeline established by investigators, Range and Garman executed their plan with calculated precision. Range arrived at the apartment complex first, parking his car in its usual spot at 11:45 p.m. He then left the area temporarily, likely waiting nearby to establish an alibi. Garman arrived minutes later, parking in a secluded corner of the lot. Using the key Range had provided, he entered the apartment at approximately 12:10 a.m. Security footage showed him wearing dark clothing and carrying what appeared to be a bag. Inside the apartment, Garman made his way to the bedroom where Porsche slept with her children. Without warning, he fired 10 shots at close range, all striking Porsche. Miraculously, none of the children were physically harmed, though they witnessed the horrific attack. After the shooting, Garman left the apartment and drove away at 12:40 a.m. Phone records show he called Range immediately after leaving. The two spoke for 3 minutes, a conversation investigators believe confirmed the murder had been completed. Range then waited nearly 2 hours before returning to the apartment. During this time, he was methodically creating his cover story. He broke a window from the outside to suggest a break-in. He scattered items around the apartment to simulate a robbery. And most disturbingly, he moved his children away from their mother's body and coached the oldest child on what to say to police. The most calculated aspect of Range's deception was his self-inflicted gunshot wound. Forensic analysis determined that the injury to his arm was consistent with a close-range, self-inflicted wound. The angle and powder burns indicated the gun had been held against his arm when fired, something highly unlikely in a struggle with an intruder. He shot himself to sell the story, the lead detective concluded. It was shallow enough not to cause serious harm, but convincing enough to support his claim of being attacked. Only after staging the scene did Range finally call 911 at 2:30 a.m., approximately 2 hours after Porsche had been killed. This delay wasn't due to shock or panic as he claimed. It was a deliberate choice to allow time for the staging and to ensure Garmin was far from the scene. As for the motive, investigators uncovered a toxic combination of control, jealousy, and revenge that had driven Range to orchestrate Porsche's murder. Text messages and witness statements revealed that Range was furious about 3 specific issues: Porsche's plans to seek full custody of their children, her discovery of his infidelity, and what he perceived as disrespect when she called him a sissy in a text message. He couldn't handle losing control of her, explained the prosecutor, who would later take the case. When she started hiding money from him and talking about custody, he decided if he couldn't control her, no one would have her. Financial records showed that Range stood to benefit from Porsche's death in another way. He was the beneficiary of a modest life insurance policy she had taken out years earlier, which would have provided him with $50,000. The conspiracy that Range had crafted so carefully ultimately fell apart under the weight of forensic evidence, technological data, and the testimony of his own child, revealing a murder plot born of the most dangerous kind of possessiveness. On February 17, 2024, just over a month after Porsche Streeter's murder, Orlando police arrested Son Range Jr. and Benjamin Garmin in a coordinated early morning operation. Both men were taken into custody without incident, Range at his workplace and Garmin at his apartment across town. The arrests came after weeks of meticulous evidence gathering and a grand jury indictment charging both men with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and child endangerment. Range faced additional charges of tampering with evidence, filing a false police report, and obstruction of justice. At their arraignment, both defendants pleaded not guilty. The judge denied bail for both men, citing the severity of the charges and the calculated nature of the crime. As Range was led from a courtroom, Porsche's mother stood up and addressed him directly. "She loved you, and you did this to her. How could you do this in front of your own children?" The Orlando community, shocked by the brutality of the crime, rallied around Porsche's 3 children. A local nonprofit organization established a trust fund to support their future education and care. Neighbors organized a candlelight vigil outside Porsche's apartment building, where dozens gathered to remember the young mother and entrepreneur. "She was always so kind," said one neighbor who attended the vigil. "She was building something for her kids. They took that from her, and they took a mother from those children. It's just heartbreaking." Custody of the children was awarded to Porsche's sister, who relocated them to another part of Florida to help them heal away from the media attention and painful memories associated with Orlando. The oldest child, whose testimony proved crucial to the case, began working with a trauma specialist to address the psychological impact of witnessing their mother's murder. As of April 2024, the case against Range and Garmin is proceeding through the Florida court system. Prosecutors have announced they will seek life sentences without the possibility of parole for both defendants. The trial is expected to begin in late 2024, with the prosecution building their case around forensic evidence, digital records, and the testimony of Porsche's oldest child, who will likely testify via closed-circuit television to avoid facing the defendants in person. The impact of Porsche's murder extended far beyond her immediate family. Her clients from her home hair salon established a memorial scholarship in her name at a local cosmetology school. Her apartment building installed additional security cameras and lighting in response to residents' concerns, despite the fact that the crime was not a random act of violence. For the detectives who worked the case, Porsche's murder represents one of the most disturbing examples of intimate partner violence they've encountered. What makes this case particularly tragic is that he used their own family member to carry out this crime, noted Detective Wilson. And he did it while their children were right there in the bed with her. As the legal process unfolds, Porsche's family has vowed to attend every court hearing, ensuring that justice is served for a woman whose only crime was seeking independence from a relationship that had become increasingly controlling and abusive. "We couldn't protect her then," Porsche's brother told reporters outside the courthouse. "But we can make sure she gets justice now." Porsche Streeter's tragic murder highlights a devastating reality that affects communities across America. Domestic violence can escalate to homicide, often when victims are attempting to leave their abusers. Her story contains warning signs and patterns that experts identify as high-risk factors for lethal violence, patterns that appear in thousands of cases each year. Research from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence shows that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they attempt to leave the relationship. This was true for Porsche, who was taking steps toward independence, hiding money, considering custody options, and establishing boundaries when Range orchestrated her murder. Dr. Amelia Rodriguez, a psychologist specializing in domestic violence, explains, abusers are fundamentally motivated by control. When they perceive that control is slipping away, the risk of lethal violence increases dramatically. What we saw in Porsche's case, the custody dispute, her growing financial independence, her standing up to him, these are all moments when an abuser may escalate to deadly force. Several warning signs in Porsche's relationship indicated heightened danger. These included a history of physical violence that had escalated over time, threats related to custody of children, financial control and monitoring, jealousy and accusations of infidelity, threats made when she attempted to establish independence, a pattern of breaking up and reconciling multiple times. These red flags appear consistently in cases that end in homicide. Understanding them can help potential victims, friends, family members, and communities identify dangerous situations before they turn deadly. Many people wonder why victims stay in abusive relationships. Porsche's situation illustrates common barriers to leaving: financial dependence, shared children, lack of support systems, and fear of escalating violence. Range paid the rent and helped with childcare, creating practical obstacles to Porsche's independence despite her efforts to build her business. Economic dependence is one of the strongest predictors of whether a victim will return to an abuser, explains Tanya Williams, director of a domestic violence shelter in Orlando. Abusers often deliberately create these dependencies, limiting their partner's access to money, transportation, or housing options. For those with children, the challenges multiply. Custody concerns, financial support for children, and the desire to maintain a two-parent household often keep victims in dangerous situations. Porsche's attempts to navigate custody issues while building financial independence represent steps many victims take, steps that unfortunately can trigger an abuser's most violent impulses. Resources exist for those in similar situations, though they remain insufficient in many communities. Domestic violence hotlines provide confidential support and safety planning. The National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-7233 connects callers with local resources including emergency shelter services, legal advocacy for restraining orders and custody issues, financial assistance programs, counseling and support groups, safety planning expertise. Many communities have also implemented lethality assessment protocols where police responding to domestic disturbance calls use a standardized questionnaire to identify high-risk situations. These assessments connect vulnerable victims with immediate services when danger is highest. What's critical is that we respond to these warning signs as a community, says Detective Maria Sanchez, who specializes in domestic violence cases. Law enforcement, courts, social services, healthcare providers, and neighbors all have roles to play in preventing these homicides. Experts emphasize that prevention requires a multifaceted approach. For potential victims, recognize warning signs early, document incidents, develop a safety plan, and connect with resources before attempting to leave. For friends and family, believe victims offer concrete help: housing, childcare, financial support, avoid judgment, and stay connected even when they return to abusers. For communities, support funding for domestic violence services, hold abusers accountable through consistent legal consequences, and challenge cultural attitudes that normalize controlling behavior. For everyone, understand that domestic violence affects all demographics and communities. It thrives in silence and isolation, making awareness and open discussion essential prevention tools. Porsche Streeter's story reminds us that domestic violence homicides are rarely spontaneous acts. They typically follow escalating patterns of control and abuse, with identifiable warning signs along the way. By recognizing these patterns and supporting those at risk, communities can work to prevent similar tragedies. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 800-799-7233, or you can text START to 88788. And if this story impacted you, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread awareness about these important issues. What state or country are you watching from, and have resources for domestic violence victims improved in your area? Your experiences and insights could help others in similar situations. This is Crime Scene Exposed, bringing light to the darkest corners of human behavior in hopes of preventing future tragedies.